Welcome to Adoption Utah. Here we share stories and practical advice from those who understand adoption in Utah. I'm Donna Pope, your host.
Welcome to episode 2 of Adoption Utah, a podcast dedicated to educating, uplifting, and shifting perceptions about adoption in the state of Utah. I'm Nathan Gwilliam, and again, I am not your host, but I'm here with Donna Pope, who will be your host. I'm interviewing her for these first 2 episodes so we can get her story and her perspectives. And Donna is the executive director of Heart to Heart Adoptions. Thanks for being with us today, Donna.
Thank you for having me.
On your show.
Thank me for having you.
So on the last episode, we talked about you and your background and stories of your 3 boys and kind of what your show is going to be about. Today, we wanted to talk a little bit about adoption in Utah. What makes adoption in Utah unique?
Well, there's a lot of great states with great adoptions. I think Utah is known for its families. It's known because families, we have big families, and we have a lot of emphasis on families. We have a lot of families here in Utah that want to build their families through adoption. And there's an openness to love the birth mom and care for her and the birth father when he's available, that warms their hearts. And so you see that good stuff like that everywhere. But we have that in Utah. We've often talked as the Utah Adoption Council and others about trying to make Utah a safe place, a kind of a safe harbor for adoption, where people can come and they can feel like they're going to be able to do this and they're going to be cared about, and they'll be able to adopt a child, and it'll be a great experience. So we try. I don't know if we're always unique on that, but that's what we want to do.
Yeah, I've never done this before, and I didn't do this in my prep for this interview, but as you talked about the differences of Utah families, I just Googled it, went to AI and looked up some of the statistics that might make Utah families a little different. And it says Utah household size is larger. Utah has an average household size of 3.1 persons compared to the national average of 2.6. 20% of households in Utah have 5 or more people, so there's a lot more larger households. Another really interesting statistic is Utah has a lot lower percentage of children living in poverty than other states in the United States. Another really interesting point about Utah families is Utah is the most religious state, according to a study that showed 76% of Utahns adhere to a religious affiliation. And one final statistic is that Utah ranks number 1 for economic outlook among all of the states in the country. So there's a lot of reasons why someone might choose to come to Utah to place a child with a family here. It's maybe a different kind of environment than some other places in the country. Maybe a little more family focused, a little more faith focused, maybe a little more economic outlook.
For sure. And women who will come here, and again, they don't need to come here, but sometimes they just need to be exposed to some of these families. They will comment about how different it is and how they don't want to go back. And that's not always the case, but sometimes it is. One of the points that I want to bring out of the families that do adopt in Utah is the faith. Now, I don't just mean the religious faith. It takes tremendous faith to walk a path that you have no control over. And when you're adopting a child, you have no control. You can do everything that you're supposed to do, and it still not work out. And then it falls through, and then to be able to move forward, even having things fall through when you would put all your hope and trust into it, being able to continue to walk that path requires tremendous faith. And I love that many of the families here in Utah have that faith. They also, as you mentioned, they have the economics. So there's a cost to adoption. Sometimes it's helpful if they have the necessary finances to be able to adopt.
Is Utah more or less expensive on average than other states in the country?
To adopt? None. It's not either.
It's about normal
Yeah,
average.
yeah. The way we do adoptions, we keep it the same everywhere. So the factors that go into it are the cost of the adoption, but we equalize it across the board.
So you've mentioned birth mothers coming here, and you've alluded to how you do adoptions. If I remember right, in Utah, the laws are friendlier for birth mothers to travel to Utah to have their baby. Am I understanding that correctly?
It can be the same wherever they're at, but I do want to talk just briefly on some of those laws of Utah, and I want to go back. When we think about the laws, there's what we call the legislative intent, meaning this is the intent of the law. What the legislators have tried to say, this is what matters. So I want to talk just about the intent that people have in the code. And the legislature, it says that the legislature finds that the state has a compelling interest in providing stable and permanent homes for adoptive children in a prompt manner. An unmarried birth mother, faced with the responsibility of making a crucial decision about the future of her newborn child, is entitled to privacy and to make a timely and appropriate decision regarding her future and the future of her child. So we've addressed two entities. We've addressed the child, which we want to give them permanency. We want to make sure that when they go into a home, they can stay in that home. We've talked about the birth mom, who, as you can tell, I care a great deal about. And she's trying to make this crucial decision about her future and the future of her unborn child. One of the things that you'll hear me say often is that there's no birth mother that doesn't love her child. They love these children, and they're trying to do the best they can for the future of that child. Also, adoptive families have a right, a protected liberty to retain the custody of their adoptive child. Once this child comes into an adoptive family's home, we want to be able to make sure that there's permanency there. This is the safety that I'm talking about, is trying to make it permanent and secure for the child, for the adoptive family, and for the birth mother. The father that might come in, he has a responsibility to either file with the putative father registry or get his name on the birth certificate or marry her. And if he does any of those things, then he has the same rights that she has to the child. He needs to have an active role and a part in it. And if he does, then his rights become as much a part as the other three. So that balancing of the four parties in the adoption quadrant is what the laws of Utah try to do. Now, is that unique to Utah? Not really. Most states have a similar try to balance. Some are a little more to one side than the other, but that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that we honor and respect the rights of all parties.
Are there any controversies that surround these issues or Utah adoption in general?
For sure. One of the biggest controversies always is in that struggle between the rights of the birth mother to make decisions and the rights of the birth father to make decisions. Most women, when they make a plan for adoption, do so because they don't have the support that they need from the birth father. And so they're oftentimes will try to get help and don't get it. So they will want to move forward with an adoption plan when he may not want to. And that becomes a controversy, as how do you then care for his rights and what rights does he have? And that's been very controversial in Utah, is how do you make that balance between the two? That's one of the big controversies.
What's one of the biggest challenges that people face related to adoption in Utah?
It's one of the biggest challenges that we have is how to balance the rights of the birth mother to receive help and yet still maybe choose not to follow through with an adoption plan. That's hard because it's not a contract. You don't come into an adoption and say, I'm going to for sure place my child with you, because every woman, when she holds that child in her arms after she has the baby, will have to go through the decision-making process again of whether or not she wants to place the child for adoption. She also will search for other resources that maybe she can parent, and she will do that. Again, they love their children. That struggle of, should I place this child? I love this child. But she's also been receiving help, and that help has come in large part from the adoptive family. So the adoptive family will be invested in both a financial and an emotional way. And so when she changes her mind or decides not to follow through with the adoption plan, that can be a fairly large challenge for everybody.
So with LDS Family Services having stepped out of adoption, they were obviously the biggest player in Utah. How has that affected the Utah adoption landscape? And how does the faith community in Utah influence the Utah adoption landscape today?
Yeah, I'll answer the first question first. It affects it because of this pro-life ideal. People of faith want children to be born. They want them to have life. And they also have the faith to be able to take those children, regardless of their differences. Again, I go back to my oldest son. Not that I'm a huge person of faith, but I do have faith. And I knew that he was going to be a drug-addicted baby. I knew that. I knew that with that drug addiction would come some significant problems. And they have. So having that faith that we can get through this together, that underlying faith is so key in every aspect of adoption, not just being able to find a child, but will that child come into my home? Can I raise that child? Can I get that child on through adulthood? Is that child mine? All of those things are hugely important to have faith in. And so that becomes a big deal.
What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the last 27 years to Utah adoption?
Oh, thank you for that question, because I think it's so important. It's the openness. It's the willingness of adoptive families to be open with birth mothers, and the willingness of birth mothers to connect, which becomes so important years later for the adoptee. I remember standing in church in the foyer of our building, and a woman in her 80s came up to me and she said, "Donna, I know you do adoptions. Do you think you can help me?" I said, what can I do to help you? And she says, and she began to cry. She's in her 80s, and she began to cry, and she said, "I just would like to know who my birth parents are." I said, "You don't know?" And she said, "No." I said, "Have you ever looked?" She says, "I've tried and tried to find out who they were." And I said, "And that still matters to you, even though, you've lived your life?" And she continued to cry. And it struck me then, this wonderful woman who I had the utmost respect for felt such a yearning and a desire to know who her biological parents were. And she had not ever been able to find out who they were. As an adoptive mother, I understand some of the apprehension that goes into not feeling like you're the mom, not feeling like maybe they'll love the biological family better than they love me. I understand those emotions, but I more importantly understand that desire that a child has to know their story, to know who they are as an adoptee and as a biological child. And so the biggest change that I've seen in the last 25 years is that openness of all parties to have that conversation, to have that be open. This is your story, good or bad. This is your story. And I think that's one of the things that I hope we can continue. One of the things I've learned as a mental health counselor is when you hide who you are, when you hide parts of yourself, it makes it difficult for you to live your life in an authentic way. And So in the world of adoption, there's been lots of secrets, lots of hiding, and allowing that to open up and people to know and accept themselves for who they are, I think is something we need to do.
Yeah, that's a huge change that's radically transformed the adoption landscape. Where do you think adoption is going to go in Utah over the next 26 years?
Well, I hope we have an influence on that. Because without, I hope that we can bring, that there's two parts to this. The first part is I hope that we can give this message loud and clear to women that if you're in a situation where you feel like you have to choose between giving life to this child or choosing to move forward with your life in a different way, that we can help them find this middle ground where we can help support them in giving life to this child while at the same time choosing good for themselves as well as the life of their child. That we can give that third middle ground to women, and that we can do that more and more often. So supporting her, that would be bringing birth fathers more into the picture wherever they're willing to come, is another thing I'd like to see us be able to do. And then allowing adoptive families to be able to adopt, both financially, relieving maybe some of the burden for them, as well as helping them feel more confident in the process of adopting. And then, of course, for adoptees, always being able to give them the opportunity to know their story as much as possible.
Donna, thank you so much for this conversation today. If our audience wants to know more about you and your work, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Right now, you can go to Adoption Utah, and there'll be show notes as well as more information on the website about me and what we're going to try to do in this podcast.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Adoption Utah. I'm Donna Pope. Please visit adoptionutah.org to sign up for our newsletter and find caring experts who can help you with your adoption journey.